There is a silent phenomenon that confuses almost all spiritual seekers: the total loss of motivation after awakening. You feel that something has changed. What once moved you no longer makes sense. Old desires seem empty, and a strange apathy takes over the soul. Paramahansa Yogananda explained that this state is not weakness, but the interval between two lives, the end of the old self and the birth of a new consciousness. What few understand is that when the inner light ignites, the ego loses control, and for a time, everything seems to crumble. But it is exactly there that the spirit begins to act. Today you will understand why this absence of motivation is, in fact, a sacred sign of transformation, and what Yogananda revealed about crossing this period without losing yourself. Have you ever experienced that disconcerting sensation of spiritually awakening after years of intense seeking, of deep meditations and dedicated studies, only to discover that now, when you finally touched something real of spiritual truth, nothing seems to motivate you anymore? The worldly ambitions that once consumed your energy sound hollow and empty. The goals that moved others around you seem small and meaningless, and you find yourself in a profound silence that sometimes seems like peace, but other times seems like merely disturbing emptiness. And you ask yourself with genuine perplexity, what happened to me? Have I lost my inner light, or have I just changed direction without knowing where I'm going? This confused and disoriented experience is not a sign of spiritual regression or psychological depression, but a common and even predictable phenomenon after genuine awakening, something that Paramahansa Yogananda described with penetrating clarity when he said, "Spirit robs man of all that is transitory, so that he may finally find that which is eternal." What few realize is that this apparent loss of motivation is not the end of the spiritual journey, but actually a crucial transition phase between two completely different modes of existing in the world. You are not regressing into unconsciousness, but crossing through what mystics of all traditions call the dark night of the awakened soul, that mysterious period where old structures of meaning have dissolved but new ones have not yet completely crystallized. Today, you will finally understand why this emptiness is not a sign of spiritual failure, but evidence that something profound is being purified and reorganized at the most fundamental level of your consciousness, why the motivation you lost needed to be lost, and what completely new type of motivation is silently germinating in this apparently sterile soil. After genuine spiritual awakening, something radical happens in the fundamental psychological structure of the human being. The ego loses its throne as absolute ruler of the psyche. And without the ego commanding your decisions and coloring your perceptions, the entire motivation system based on doing for doing's sake, to prove your worth, to conquer recognition, to win imaginary competitions, all this system completely loses its flavor and its propelling force. Before awakening, you acted compulsively, moved by unconscious needs for affirmation, by deep fears of inadequacy, by insatiable desires to become someone special in others' eyes and in your own eyes. But now, having glimpsed your true nature beyond the social character, having experienced, even if briefly, the peace that doesn't depend on external achievements, you discover that you simply can no longer motivate yourself with the same carrots that once made you run without questioning. And here is what almost no one dares to consider. This loss of egoic motivation is not a defect in the awakening process, but exactly what should happen. It's a sign that something in you is dying so that something deeper can be born. Mystics of all traditions gave different names to this experience. Some call it the dark night of the awakened soul. Others speak of the desert of the spirit. Still others describe it as the fertile void. But all agree that it is a necessary time of radical reorientation, where consciousness needs to completely recalibrate itself, leaving behind childish motivations based on fear and egoic desire, and slowly awakening to mature motivations based on love and transpersonal purpose. Paramahansa Yogananda used to teach using a powerful metaphor. God first takes the toy of the world from our hands so that we may finally learn to play with him in the kingdom of spirit. And although this removal of toys may initially seem like cruel loss or unjust punishment, it is actually the greatest gift the universe can offer to a soul that is ready to mature beyond superficial motivations. While you are still obsessed with toys, while you still believe that happiness will come from the next external achievement, you remain fundamentally distracted from the only quest that truly satisfies, the quest for conscious union with the source of all being. What seems like devastating loss of meaning and purpose is actually the soul slowly detoxifying from illusions of compulsive doing without conscious being. It's the entire system being purged of motivational toxins accumulated during decades of social conditioning, of cultural programming, of unconscious identification with the character you were taught to play. This detoxification process is not comfortable, certainly not quick, but it is absolutely necessary for real transformation to happen. The lack of motivation you experience after spiritual awakening is not a symptom of clinical depression or loss of vitality, but the natural and inevitable mourning of the old personality that is dying, that constructed I, that desperately wanted to be someone special, that tirelessly sought to prove its worth, that measured its success through external achievements and social recognition. This I is literally dissolving like mist in the sun of awakened consciousness. Simultaneously, the eternal I am, that conscious presence that has always existed beyond all temporary characters, that was never born and will never die, that doesn't need to conquer anything because it is already complete in itself. This true being is slowly being born into everyday consciousness, emerging from the depths where it always dwelt but was rarely recognized. The problem is that you are at the exact transition point between these two fundamentally different identities, and in this no man's land between the death of one and the full birth of the other, there naturally exists a vacuum, an absence of clear motivation because old motivations died but new ones have not yet fully matured. When the ego dies, or at least begins to die, all the compulsive impulse to act, to affirm oneself, to prove something, to become someone, all this neurotic impulse disappears like fuel that has run out. And this is good. It's excellent. It's exactly what needs to happen, even if it's profoundly disorienting to experience. There is a Zen parable about a monk who, after years of intense practice, had a profound awakening, and immediately afterward fell into depression because nothing seemed to matter anymore. He couldn't motivate himself to do absolutely anything, not even spiritual practices that had previously been a source of great joy. His master, observing the situation, simply said, "Good, very good. The old monk has finally died. Now be patient and allow the new to be born in its own time, without forcing anything." The disciple didn't understand initially, but obeyed and remained in the emptiness without trying to escape it. And gradually, weeks later, a new kind of action began to emerge naturally, not motivated by fear or desire, but flowing spontaneously from a place of serene presence. The essential practice in this phase is not to try to force motivation through willpower discipline or through severe self-criticism for feeling lazy. These approaches only prolong suffering because they try to resuscitate the dead ego. Instead, the practice is to consciously allow this to be a time of sacred interval between two lives, the life of the seeker that is dying and the life of the awakened being that is being born. Sit daily in silent meditation and simply observe the emptiness without judgment, without trying to fill it, without resisting it, and affirm with profound acceptance, "I allow the old to die completely so that the new may be born in its own time. I trust the transformation process, even when I don't understand its methods." There exists a universal spiritual law that operates both in the physical realm and in the realm of consciousness. Every seed must first completely dissolve in the moist darkness of the soil before it can germinate and sprout toward the light. The hard outer shell needs to soften and break. The interior of the seed needs to literally decompose and transform its substance, and only after this apparently destructive process can new life emerge. The exact same principle governs spiritual development after awakening. The wanting nothing you experience is not useless stagnation, but the dark and silent space where new purpose is germinating at levels so deep that your conscious mind cannot yet perceive the movement. Divine law, operating with surgical precision in your life, deliberately removes old superficial motivations to open psychic space where a completely new direction can emerge. A direction that doesn't come from external conditioning or social comparison, but from the depths of your own being, aligned with the cosmic flow. If old motivations remain occupying all the space of your consciousness, if you were still totally absorbed in egoic ambitions, there simply would be no empty space where something genuinely new could be born. You would continue just repeating old patterns with small superficial variations. Yogananda taught about a disciple who, after years of disciplined spiritual practice, had a genuine awakening and immediately lost all motivation to do anything. He didn't want to meditate, didn't want to work, didn't want to socialize, simply wanted to sit and exist in quietude. Other disciples began to criticize him for spiritual laziness, but Yogananda corrected them firmly. Leave him alone. He is in the seed phase now. Soon the sprout phase will come, and then the flower phase, but each stage has its own time and cannot be rushed. And indeed, after a few weeks of apparent inertia, the disciple began to act again, but with completely different quality. His actions no longer came from tense effort, but flowed naturally from a place of inner peace. It is in this apparent emptiness, in this quietude that seems unproductive to the world's eyes, that the soul's authentic impulse is gradually born, that type of motivation that doesn't seek external reward, that doesn't need others' approval, that simply wants to express itself because divine love wants to act through your unique form. The practical application is to cultivate profound patience with yourself during this transition phase. When you feel lack of motivation, instead of forcing yourself to act mechanically or criticizing yourself for not doing anything, simply sit in silence, breathe consciously, and declare internally, I trust that Spirit is leading me to a higher motivation, the motivation to act not because I need to prove something, but simply because love wants to express itself through me. The lack of motivation you experience after awakening functions as a crystalline mirror, reflecting with implacable precision the process of interior deconstruction happening in deep layers of the psyche. And if you have the courage to look honestly at this mirror, instead of averting your eyes with fear or shame, it will reveal liberating truths about where you are still stuck in old patterns of seeking meaning outside yourself. Every moment you feel, I have no desire to do anything, is actually a whispered invitation from the soul to investigate. And what in me still believes my worth depends on what I do. What in me still seeks validation through external achievements? Paramahansa Yogananda taught that after genuine awakening, the soul needs to cross through a period of fundamental re-education where it learns to act without desire for results, but with natural joy that springs simply from conscious expression of the divine through human form. Before awakening, you acted because you wanted something, wanted money, status, approval, pleasure, security, and all action was contaminated by this desire to obtain something you felt was lacking. After awakening, this motivational model based on lack simply doesn't work anymore, because at some deep level, you already realize that nothing external can fill what you thought was empty. There was a spiritual practitioner who, after an intensive meditation retreat, returned home completely unmotivated to continue his work as a lawyer, not because he hated the profession, but simply because old motivations, earning money, impressing clients, climbing the career, had completely evaporated. He panicked, thinking he had lost his healthy ambition, but a wise master explained to him, "You didn't lose anything real. You just stopped acting based on fear and desire. Now, be patient. Soon, if it's right for you to continue as a lawyer, a new motivation will arise, not based on getting something, but on serving and expressing your unique qualities. And if it's not right to continue in this profession, a different direction will naturally reveal itself." The transformative practice for this phase is to constantly ask the reflective question, what in me is still trying to derive identity and worth from what I do, instead of simply being what I am? Every time you feel lack of motivation, instead of immediately trying to find a new external goal to pursue, sit quietly and investigate. Are you seeking to do something to feel complete, or to express the completeness that already exists? When you perceive the difference between these two motivations, one based on lack, the other based on fullness, declare to yourself, "Born Wynod, I didn't lose purpose. I'm just learning to live without depending on external purposes to feel valuable, because my worth is inherent in my existence as an expression of the divine." The phenomenon of losing motivation after spiritual awakening is not an isolated or pathological experience of some disoriented individuals, but a recognized and documented stage in practically all great spiritual traditions of humanity. And this universality reveals that we are dealing with a fundamental principle of consciousness development, not with a personal problem that needs to be fixed. In Mahayana Buddhism, this stage is known as sunyata, the fertile emptiness, where all conceptual structures dissolve, including concepts about purpose and motivation, creating empty space where true active compassion can eventually be born. Not compassion based on moral duty, but compassion that flows spontaneously when the illusion of separation dissolves and you realize that alleviating others' suffering is alleviating your own suffering, because there is no longer rigid division between you and them. In classical Hinduism, particularly in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and yoga traditions, this state is called vairagya, genuine detachment, that is not cold indifference or depressive apathy, but inner freedom that allows acting in the world without action being contaminated by desire for specific fruits. Krishna teaches Arjuna exactly about this: to act with total commitment but without attachment to results, to do what needs to be done not because you want something in return, but simply because it is the natural expression of Dharma, of your unique role in the cosmic drama. But before this detached action can manifest, there naturally exists a period where old attached motivations need to die, and this period manifests as apparent lack of motivation. In mystical Christianity, often ignored by more literal interpretations of the tradition, this stage is symbolized by the desert, where Jesus spent 40 days and nights after his baptism and before beginning his public ministry. That period of solitude, temptation, and purification, where nothing happens externally but everything happens internally, where old ego temptations are confronted and overcome, where human will gradually aligns with divine will. The 40 days in the desert are not punishment or cruel test from God, but necessary interval of preparation where the human instrument is tuned to play celestial music. All these apparently diverse traditions converge on the same fundamental truth: the wanting nothing you experience after awakening is not the end of the spiritual path, but actually the dark and silent womb where new divine wanting is being gestated, a radically different motivation that doesn't seek results to inflate the ego, but simply wants to express divine nature through actions that benefit the whole. The integrating practice is to study these different traditions and recognize your own process reflected in them, perceiving that you are not alone, that thousands of seekers before you crossed through this same dark valley and emerged from the other side transformed, and affirm, "I honor this time of emptiness as sacred preparation. I trust I am being molded for a greater purpose. I cannot yet see clearly. We now arrive at the most important practical question: what to do concretely during this disorienting period of apparent lack of motivation, how to navigate this nebulous terrain between the death of old motivations and the birth of new ones without falling into destructive passivity or forcing artificial activity. The answer is not in complicated techniques or elaborate practices, but in a simple yet profound exercise of active surrender, of silent prayer that realigns your individual will with the greater will that moves the entire cosmos. And this exercise, when practiced with genuine sincerity daily, gradually dissolves confusion and allows clear direction to emerge from interior silence. Begin by finding a moment of the day where you can be completely alone and won't be interrupted. It can be early morning before the house awakens, or at night after everyone has slept. The important thing is to have this sacred space just for yourself. Sit comfortably but with erect spine, close your eyes gently, and breathe deeply and slowly 3 times, allowing each exhalation to release a bit more accumulated tension, each inhalation bringing growing quietude. When you feel mental agitation has diminished at least a little, place your right hand gently over the center of the chest, that point where you feel deep emotions, and connect with the energetic heart. Now repeat, not mechanically but with genuine feeling springing from the depths of being, the following paradoxical prayer that completely inverts the usual relationship between you and the divine. Lord, I don't want to do your will as if it were an external task that falls to me to execute. I want your will to make me, mold me, transform me until there is no more difference between what I want and what you want. Allow these words to penetrate deeply, feeling the radical meaning of what you're asking. It's no longer you trying to discover and execute some abstract divine will, but you offering yourself as clay to be molded by the invisible hands of Spirit. After pronouncing this prayer with all the sincerity you can gather, simply remain in silence with your hands still over the heart, feeling the rhythmic pulsing under your palm. And don't ask for anything specific. Don't try to force answers or clear directions. Just listen with your entire being. The direction you seek won't come as thundering voice from heaven or as detailed plan downloaded into your mind, but as subtle intuition, as gentle sensation of yes or no when you think of different possibilities, as small but significant synchronicities that begin to appear in your daily life. It will come as naturally as sunrise after the darkest night, inevitable but gentle. Practice this daily and declare, I surrender to divine timing. I trust I will be guided not by my anxious effort, but by grace that operates through my conscious surrender. And here is the revelation that completely transforms your understanding of what is happening, what you have been calling lack of motivation. And interpreting as a problem that needs to be solved is actually the clearest evidence that you're crossing through the most significant transition possible, the transition from life governed by small and limited human will to life conducted by vast and unlimited divine will. You are not being punished for having spiritually awakened. You are not regressing to an inferior state. You didn't lose the path. You are being prepared, refined, emptied of egoic motivations so you can be filled with cosmic purpose that is infinitely greater and more satisfying than any personal ambition could be. Spirit, in its infinite wisdom, cannot operate fully through a human instrument that is still full of its own agendas, its own rigid plans, its own motivations born of fear and desire. It's like trying to play a beautiful melody on a completely out-of-tune instrument full of broken strings. So Spirit's first work when someone awakens and becomes receptive is to empty this instrument, removing the old and worn strings of egoic motivations, cleaning accumulated dust of social conditioning, tuning each part to vibrate in harmony with celestial frequencies. And this emptying and cleaning process necessarily manifests as a period where you no longer know what to do or where to go. There is a profound story of Saint Teresa of Avila, the great Christian mystic, who after years of spiritual ecstasies entered a prolonged period she described as absolute dryness, where all spiritual practices seemed dead and meaningless, where she no longer felt the divine presence that previously filled her with joy, where she simply couldn't motivate herself to do anything, even the devotions she once loved. She feared she had lost God's grace, but years later understood that was exactly the period where God was working most deeply in her, removing even her attachment to spiritual experiences, emptying her so completely that nothing remained of her own will, preparing her to become a pure instrument through which extraordinary miracles of healing and wisdom would flow. So when you no longer know what to do, when old motivations died but new ones haven't yet clearly been born, recognize that this is not negative emptiness, but sacred space. It is exactly in this not knowing that God finally has space to act through you without interference from your personal agenda. The practice is to cultivate profound acceptance of this state, declaring daily, I don't know what to do, and that's okay. I don't need to know, because God knows, and I trust I will be moved in perfect timing to do exactly what needs to be done, not by my anxious planning, but by divine wisdom operating through me. But how to live concretely in the everyday world during this transition period, how to pay bills and fulfill responsibilities when you don't feel motivation to do practically anything. The answer is not in trying to resuscitate old motivations based on fear of consequences or desire for rewards, nor in simply giving up everything and passively waiting for some divine inspiration to magically solve all practical problems. The answer lies in completely replacing the anxious search for external motivation with constant practice of conscious presence in the present moment, doing what is before you with total attention, even without feeling particular enthusiasm about it. Instead of waking up in the morning and immediately looking for something to motivate you, for some goal that excites you, for some aim that justifies getting out of bed, simply begin doing small actions with full consciousness, as if each mundane gesture were a sacred opportunity for God to experience physical life through your form. Cook breakfast not because you need caffeine to function or because you're hungry, but as meditation and movement, where you are totally present to the aroma of the beans, to the sound of boiling water, to the warmth of the cup between your hands. And in this total presence, discover that action doesn't need artificial motivation, because conscious action itself is already fullness. Yogananda taught that joy is the proof of God's presence. And this doesn't mean you need to be jumping with happiness all the time, but that when you are genuinely present, when you're not lost in thoughts about past or future, when you're not comparing your current situation with some imagined ideal, there exists a subtle but real joy that permeates even the simplest activities. So the practice is not to seek motivation to do great extraordinary things, but to cultivate presence that allows discovering natural joy in small, ordinary things. Walking consciously, feeling each step, breathing deeply, appreciating the miracle of gas exchange that keeps you alive, washing dishes with total attention to hand movement and water temperature. And when opportunity arises to serve someone, when a friend asks for help, when you perceive a need in your environment, when something clearly needs to be done, do it without calculating, what do I gain from this? Without expecting gratitude or recognition, simply because serving is the natural expression of love. And love doesn't need external motivation because it is its own motivation. Declare as daily practice, today I don't seek goals that excite me. I seek presence that fulfills me. I don't look for external motivation. I cultivate internal joy that makes any action, even the simplest, a celebration of divine life expressing itself through me. As you practice this conscious presence consistently, something subtle but profound begins to change in the quality of your life experience. True spiritual motivation, as different from egoic motivation as diamond is from coal, gradually begins to emerge not as something you need to seek or force, but as natural flow that springs spontaneously from a heart that finally learned to simply be, instead of constantly trying to become something different. And this authentic motivation is fundamentally love in movement, not sentimental or romantic love, but love as cosmic force that naturally wants to flow, express, create, serve, bless. You stop acting primarily to have something you feel is lacking. Stop working only to earn money, relating only to receive affection, serving only to gain spiritual merit, and begin to act simply because you are something, because a certain unique quality of the divine wants to express itself through your particular form. And this expression happens naturally when you're not blocking with egoic agendas and deep fears. It's like a river that doesn't need motivation to flow, simply flows because it's its nature to flow. Or like the sun that doesn't need a reason to shine, simply shines because it's its essence to radiate light and heat. There was a Zen practitioner who, after years of intensive meditation, had a profound awakening and completely lost motivation to continue his lucrative career in technology. He sat at home for months, doing practically nothing besides meditating and walking, and his family began to worry. But then, gradually, he began to notice that when he walked in the park, he saw trash and naturally picked it up without thinking. When he saw an elderly person with difficulty, he naturally offered help without calculating. When friends shared problems, he naturally offered compassionate presence without trying to fix anything. He realized action hadn't stopped. It had just changed nature. Instead of neurotic action motivated by fear and ambition, it was now spontaneous action motivated by love and presence. Genuine spiritual awakening doesn't take away your motivation forever, leaving you paralyzed in passive inertia. It purifies your motivation, transforming it from something based on lack and fear to something based on fullness and love. And this purification necessarily passes through a period of emptying where old motivations die before new ones have fully matured. So be patient with yourself during this transition, trusting that the universe moves through you in ways your small mind cannot plan or control, and affirm daily. I release all need to act based on fear of not being enough. I allow love to be my only true motivation. And I trust this love will guide me to actions that serve the greater good in ways I cannot even imagine now. The apparent emptiness many feel after a spiritual awakening is not a setback, but a sign of profound interior transformation. When the heart finds peace, action becomes prayer, and this means you don't need grandiose goals to live with purpose. This silence that seems like lack of motivation is, in fact, the space where the new is being gestated. It is the fertile soil before the harvest, the calm at the center of the hurricane, the sacred interval in which the soul reorganizes itself to act in a more authentic and guided way. Trusting this state is understanding that purpose is not born from effort, but from surrender. If this message brought clarity and comfort, transform this perception into conscious action. Repeat with conviction, I didn't lose my motivation. I am transmuting fear into love and being guided by the divine. Click and like up as recognition that you value this type of reflection, and subscribe to continue receiving teachings that unite ancient wisdom and modern experience. Share this video with those who also feel the weight of not doing anything, but are actually going through the deepest interior preparation. And if you feel the call, write in the comments, I act by divine will, as a symbol of your alignment with a greater purpose. May the eternal light in your heart illuminate the path through silence, revealing that emptiness was never absence, but pure presence. May each moment of quietude be recognized as sacred time of spiritual gestation, and may true motivation, free from ego and anxiety, arise naturally, gentle, constant, and divine. Om Shanti, 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 profound and serene peace, so that you understand that silence is not the end, but the birth of your real purpose.